Hello, Gareth and Rachel. Thank you very much for joining me today. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Okay, hi, my name's Gareth Wrench. I'm the Associate Director for the Local Knowledge Intelligence Service at Public Health England in the West Midlands.
Hi, I'm Rachel Chapman. I'm a Public Health Specialty Registrar and have been involved in this work during a placement at Public Health England in the West Midlands.
That's great, thanks. So we met through the Population Health Management Academy, and you guys did a big piece of work across the West Midlands around Analyst skills mapping. So do you want to just tell us a bit about that and sort of an introduction to the work that you guys did?
Yeah, so this was a big piece of work that we embarked in across the West Midlands, and it's also been undertaken across the East Midlands footprint as well. So we've covered the whole of the Midlands region, and it was around mapping the skills of the population health intelligence community. So we undertook a big exercise to really try and map the existing capability and capacity in population health intelligence across all the individual STP footprints. And really the purpose of that work was really to develop an understanding of that sort of skills mix, to identify some of the particular strengths of those teams across the patch, and also to try and set out some of the potential opportunities around collaboration. And it was also to better understand some of the current gaps in the population health intelligence workforce, essentially, to try and inform things like future training needs, how arm's length bodies like PHE and NHS England might provide some support around training and other offers. And also identifying where there might be potential priorities for other external support as well. So that was the piece of work that we undertook. So we interviewed, I think it was about just under sort of 50 teams across over 30 different organisations across the West Midlands. I think we identified just under 600 whole-time equivalent analysts working in a population health intelligence capacity. So that was anyone working in an analytical role across local authority public health teams, local authority corporate research teams, CCG business intelligence, and also trust informatics teams, and also some commissioning support unit colleagues as well. And it was about trying to map that capacity and capability across that wider system.
Yeah. And I think we were amazed when the findings came out, weren't we, about how many analysts there actually were in the system and people kind of available to do the work. Yeah,
certainly identified there was a good sort of critical capacity of people working in analytical roles. Yeah,
which is great. So today we're kind of talking about why analysis is important for health and care. So particularly in the context of decision making and kind of the use of analysis as well. So Rachel, were you going to answer that one?
Yes, so I think it's important in many different ways. So if we look at the commissioning cycle or the population health management cycle, you can see that analysis is crucial all the way through that cycle. So at the needs assessment stage, in terms of modelling for demand, capacity, what services might deliver, in terms of options appraisal as to which services might deliver and what they will give you, and then monitoring and evaluation. That actually we need analysis at each point of that cycle to enable effective decision making. I think we talk quite a lot in terms of using the evidence base, and then often get quite frustrated that we haven't necessarily got the full evidence base that we would like. But I think analysis can be a key part of developing this in terms of translating national information, in terms of translating information from other areas to help us understand problems and start to shape those solutions. I think then it sort of adds and follows the core public health or population health principles that we try to work by with the evidence-based approach in terms of applying scientific rigour and judgment to issues. So it helps prevent sort of anecdotal good ideas perhaps popping up, because we've got a real basis for making decisions, and making decisions at the level of a population rather than perhaps just at an individual level. And then I think also, I think analysts can be a really important part of decision making, because they can actually help define what is the problem in the first place. So a crucial part is often defining the research or business question at the outset. And if analysts are involved at that point, we can make sure we're asking the right question before we even start the work.
Yeah, that's great. So particularly kind of not just the analysis and what people are producing, but actually getting the people in right from the start. So getting the analysts that we have within our systems involved in the whole cycle in terms of the producing evidence and carrying out the work.
Absolutely. So when we were doing the skills mapping, one of the things we asked about was consultancy skills. And that is very much in terms of being involved in defining the question and then working out how to answer it, rather than just being asked for some data. Because I think it brings a real richness to, first of all, asking the right question, but then also understanding what the data are telling you and what the answer is.
Yeah, definitely. So kind of thinking particularly about, I guess, the work that you were doing in the skills mapping, to what extent do you think we currently use analysis well and use our analysts well across the system?
Yeah, I think it's a really mixed picture, to be honest. And there's a lot of differences across different parts of the health and care system. I mean, what our skills mapping sort of really uncovered was that, whilst there was quite considerable sort of analytical capacity and a considerable analytical workforce, it was quite variable across organisations and even within organisations. So we found that local authority analytics teams tend to be quite strong on the sort of typical sort of analytical work, quite strong on research and evaluation, and good on sort of sources of population health data. Whereas NHS organisations tended to be a bit stronger on the sort of data management, the data extraction, querying skills, and also around benchmarking. So there was quite a systematic sort of difference there. We also found there was quite a spectrum across teams in terms of the way in which analysis was used and the way in which skills were deployed. So there's a particular focus around sort of routine monitoring and performance management. And partly some of that was driven by sort of organisational culture, and partly by sort of individuals' own drive, skills and interest. But there seemed to be quite a sort of focus on that sort of performance aspect, and it's whether that skill set could be potentially better sort of utilised within the system. I think we found that what we used as part of the work was something called the data decisions hierarchy, and this is where we think about managing and producing data and then being able to turn it into information by the use of basic analytical techniques, and then to turn that information into intelligence with interpretation and narrative, and various sort of statistical skills. And then at the final stage, turning that intelligence into insight to inform decision making. And what we found there was maybe there weren't enough sort of analysts at that sort of top level who were able to turn that intelligence into insight and translate it to decision makers. And what we found was analysts weren't sometimes sort of close enough to those key decision makers to be able to influence them and get their sort of work noticed, even though we knew that there was high caliber analysis being undertaken. I think one final thing maybe to mention was also there were some opportunities to bring in sort of very expert skills in a better way. So particularly where some analysts had gone away and developed a new skill and a new sort of technique. So we're thinking around things like machine learning and new techniques where they were trying to develop to know what questions that they could help to answer in terms of their analytical responses.
We've heard, it's interesting that kind of final point we've heard from other speakers that they feel that actually a lot of analysts who do that kind of specialist technical training are kind of forced to do it in their own time, or kind of it's not valued as much by their organisation, and in terms of, because the day-to-day work kind of just swamps kind of everything. So I don't know if you had any observations on that. Or...
Yeah, I think there was just something around, again, sort of leadership and giving analysts a bit of freedom to try and develop some of those sort of new skill sets and yeah, new techniques. It's a very sort of fast-moving agenda at the moment, and I think analysts need a bit of time to think and develop those new skills if they're going to be utilised effectively. And like you say, I think a lot of people's time was sort of overtaken with very sort of day-to-day type sort of reactive response, and rather than having to consider how to best utilise the skills in relation to some of the difficult sort of analytical questions that are being posed. Yeah, definitely. That brings us quite nicely onto kind of actually what can we do to make better use of our analysts and the work that they're doing in the system.
So I think there is quite a lot we can actually do. So in terms of the data to decisions journey, I think we need to look at that whole journey. So not just the data to information part of it, where we've got lots of raw data and we might turn it into information, but then taking that journey all the way through and turning that information into intelligence and then using it to influence decisions. So I think if systems could start thinking of analysis in that context, it would make much better use of the expertise that's in the system. And I think then a key part of that is about upskilling perhaps some of the customers or the commissioners of the intelligence, to make sure that the people who are involved in making the decisions can really make the best use of that information and intelligence. And then in terms of analysts, certainly a consideration of how analysts can better work jointly across organisations on priorities which would enhance that system-wide intelligence. We found different sets of skills in different organisations, but if you start to look at a system-wide level, then those skills, all of the skills were present, but perhaps at different levels in different organisations. And we could make better use of them by working across the organisations. We certainly found there was a lot of capacity focused on performance reporting or routine monitoring. So there's a lot of discussion about whether that could be better utilised. There were several conversations about feeding the beast and recognising some of the beasts are well out of our control, but some of them are within our control, and maybe if we looked at how some of that capacity is currently being used, we could free it up to do more of the information to intelligence to decision steps of the journey. I think there was a real need to, at scale, recognise the skills and contribution that analysts can make. In some organisations, I think they're already on that journey, but in others, not so much. And sometimes it was seen as more of a back office function. Analyst teams sit in different parts of the organisation, and that had quite an influence on how they were viewed and what they were used for. So I think there is perhaps some work that could be done to look at that, because it's about understanding what analysts can bring to the table. And if they're not given the opportunity to do that, it's not going to happen. And I think as part of that, it's also making sure that analysts are senior enough within organisations to be able to link in at a senior management or board level as a route into decision making. So we were having discussions around analytical leadership. And again, some organisations are on that journey, whereas others, they still need to be thinking about that. And then finally, I think it's a message about there is a lot of capability within the existing system. And I think we could be looking at how we better use this rather than perhaps the tendency to look to go and buy it in and bring it in from outside. Whereas if we used and developed our own analysts and looked at better career progression for them within the system, I think we'll be able to make far better use of the skills that are there.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a strong message that's coming through as well from others that we've spoken to across the system. I'm going to switch the questions around slightly, because so given you did the work kind of before COVID, how is all of kind of since COVID has happened, how has the system changed, and have you seen any kind of the developments that you'd kind of hoped for when you carried out the work starting, or do you think we're still kind of struggling with the same issues?
Yeah, I think it's probably resulted in a couple of sort of changes, really. Sort of linked to some of the work and the findings that the skills mapping sort of uncovered, really. So I think more than ever it sort of highlights the need for really responsive, accurate, robust, comprehensive, insightful analysis, and which can be acted upon quickly. So the pandemic response, things are rapidly changing. There's sort of data here, there, and everywhere, and there's a real call for good, reliable, robust intelligence provided straight up to decision makers for them to act upon really, really swiftly. And I think one of the other sort of interesting sort of impacts of the pandemic is it's almost forced people within different organisations to come together and work more closely from a sort of analytical perspective. So certainly in the conversations that I've had with public health intelligence staff, definitely been working more closely alongside their trust informatics colleagues and their CCG BI people and CSU analysts, for instance, just to try and join up and develop that sort of holistic understanding of what's going on in a rapidly changing, very complicated situation. I think the only other thing is it has maybe sort of highlighted some gaps around sort of data availability, potentially where analysts could have better been utilised, and things coordinated a bit better at the outset, at the start of the pandemic. And it's probably sort of highlighted, I think a lot of the sort of skill set and knowledge and understanding is based around sort of non-communicable disease. I think it's probably highlighted a bit of a gap in terms of sort of infectious disease, epidemiology and surveillance sort of understanding that we might need to sort of think about as we move forward in terms of the sort of workforce development kind of agenda.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. So in terms of kind of looking to the future, what would you like to see as the kind of the key changes in the next year, couple of years, to make better use of our workforce?
Yeah, I think there's a few different examples here. I think one's around sort of organisational culture and really getting leaders and decision makers to really recognise the contribution that analysts can make to help better inform their decision-making processes. So here we'd like to think of each organisation to have a kind of analytical champion, I guess, at a very senior level, and that might help in terms of changing that culture moving forward. I think as Rachel sort of talked about, something around the upskilling of customers and the commissioners of intelligence, so really helping them to understand how we define problems and think about the various methods in which we can answer those. And that obviously links to the work that the strategy unit colleagues have been doing around helping leaders to better understand analytical processes. Again, I think there's something around trying to think about, from a capacity perspective, shifting some of those working practices around routine monitoring, performance management, to delivering more strategic intelligence that really helps to drive decision making. I think there's something around better use of analytical networks, be those either at a local, a regional or a national level, and linking into organisations such as AFA, the Association of Professional Healthcare Analytics. And I think there's a big sort of issue around the professionalisation of the analytical workforce as well, sort of moving forward, and how do we provide sort of suitable career progression opportunities for analysts as they sort of progress from a more junior level to a more senior level. And I think there's something that local systems can probably do around what we found in the skills mapping work, that was that every patch had sort of at least some expert capacity on each of the various aspects that we're interested in. There's probably something there about how we better utilise that expert capacity to try and help others, and to try and develop local support models that might then in turn help to build a bit of additional system capability and capacity on some of those sort of scarcer skills. And I think finally, I think for me, to really demonstrate the sort of worth of analysts locally, we really need to kind of showcase some really stellar examples of analytical work, to really demonstrate the contribution that analysts can bring to this agenda. So I think a better way of sort of blowing our own trumpet to a certain degree and really highlighting and showcasing those really good examples of analytical work. And I think moving forward, it probably links to the decision support unit sort of concept that myself and colleagues are working on with the strategy unit, again, as to how we better sort of utilise and join up some of this intelligence across different parts of the health and care system, and how we sort of network it together across different STPs and ICSs sort of moving forward. So I think those would be the key things for me over the next sort of 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, that's great. And you know that, the strategy, particularly the networking and showcasing, we're quite keen on doing, because as soon as you start picking, I think as soon as you start looking under the surface, there's definitely loads of stuff going on. And one of the key things we've learned through the kind of PHM Academy has actually been there's so many people out there kind of keen to be involved and wanting to be doing stuff. But it's, how do we connect them up? How do we flag the good work that's going on? How do we kind of demonstrate the impact it's having and all that kind of thing? So
I think sometimes there's a concern amongst analysts that they need to do this really groundbreaking sort of analysis, whereas actually some things can be fairly simple and still have quite an impact and an influence. And I think we need to be better as a sort of whole sort of sector in terms of showcasing those good and simple examples that people can sort of copy and mimic and utilize elsewhere. There's a lot of good work going on with the systems. We probably just need to be better at sort of surfacing it and getting it recognized. Yeah,
definitely. Rachel, I'm going to ask you the same question, kind of next 12 to 18 months, what would you have any takeaway points to add, or any kind of key things that you'd like to add to what Gareth said?
So I think Gareth's covered most of it. I think there is something here about more of a storytelling with data and information. And I think that helps to bring other people in. So it's not just about the data, the information, the intelligence itself, it's the so what. And I think as we move forward over the next 12 to 18 months, I think that's going to be a key question we're going to be asking and need to have answered.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's really interesting in terms of actually what's the story behind the data that we're showing and looking at and using.
And I think that might help bridge some of the gap between the analysts and the customers or the audience of the intelligence, that if they can go beyond the analysis into the so what is this telling us, what does this mean, and what can we do about it, I think that really then is what the decision makers want and need to hear.